My post-trauma therapist is hunting something inside me. They tell you the therapy is for your own good, a mandatory step on the road to recovery. They use words like processing, integration, and post-traumatic growth. They assure you that the person you're about to meet is the best in their field, someone who can help you make sense of the senseless. They tell you it's a safe space, but they don't tell you what to do when that person, that therapist, leans forward, their eyes devoid of empathy, and asks you the wrong kind of questions. They don't prepare you for the chilling realization that they aren't trying to heal your trauma. They're trying to excavate it. They're looking for something buried inside the wreckage of your mind, and they will keep digging no matter the cost to you. My name is Elias Vance. I was part of the St. Augustine expedition, a team of 6 spelunkers and geologists charting the deepest sections of the Oak Haven cave system. I am the only one who came back. And this is the story of the man they sent to help me and the questions he asked that broke the world all over again. The room they gave me was sterile. That's the only word for it. Not like a hospital room, full of the quiet beeps and hums of machinery that promises life, but like a place scrubbed clean of life itself. The walls were a soft, non-committal gray. The single window was made of thick, polarized glass that turned the outside world into a muted, watercolor smudge. There was a bed, a table, a chair. And for 3 weeks, that was my entire universe. After they pulled me from the mouth of the Oak Haven caves, there was a flurry of activity. Blankets, paramedics, hushed voices in uniforms that I didn't recognize. They took me to a private facility, a place with no name on the gate, just a number. They told me I was in shock, suffering from severe dehydration and psychological distress. They said I needed to rest, to let my mind heal before the debriefing. But I knew it was more than that. The way they looked at me, the way their questions never strayed towards the practical, where are the others? But always danced around the edges of the impossible. What did you experience down there? The others. Alex, the lead geologist, with a laugh that could echo for miles. Ben and Chloe, the young, brilliant couple who were the heart of our team. Dr. Miles Corbin, the seasoned veteran who had mapped more caves than any man alive. And Samira, our communications tech, my closest friend, the one who held my hand in the darkness until the darkness took it. Their faces were a constant slideshow in my mind, a phantom limb I could feel with aching clarity. The official story, the one I overheard being whispered in the hallways, was that there had been a seismic event. Cave-in. Tragic, but not unheard of. A calculated risk of the profession. They were waiting for me to be stable enough to help them pinpoint the location of the collapse for a recovery effort. A recovery effort. The words felt like a sick joke. You can't recover what has been unmade. On the 22nd day, a new man walked into my room. He wasn't wearing a doctor's white coat or a government suit. He wore a simple, well-fitted tweed jacket, dark trousers, and worn leather shoes. He looked like a university professor, perhaps of history or philosophy. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and hair that was just a little too long to be fashionable. But it was his eyes that held you. They were a pale, washed-out blue, and they seemed to absorb the light in the room. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm and measured. It was a voice trained to soothe, but it had the opposite effect on me. It was like hearing a predator mimic the call of a harmless animal. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. I've been assigned to you. I'm here to help you process what happened." He pulled the single chair from the corner and placed it a respectable distance from my bed. He didn't have a notepad. He didn't have a pen. He just sat, hands gently folded in his lap, and watched me. "I don't need to process anything," I said, my voice hoarse. "I need to tell someone what really happened. There wasn't a cave-in. Not like they think." He nodded slowly, a gesture of placid understanding that set every nerve in my body on edge. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here. The official report can wait. Your well-being is the priority. So, let's start simple. Tell me about the cave. Before the incident. What did it feel like to be there?" It seemed like a safe enough question. A typical therapeutic starting point. Grounding. I took a breath, the first one that didn't feel like I was breathing in shards of glass, and I began to speak. I told him about the descent, the familiar thrill of rappelling into the earth's throat, the smell of damp stone and ancient air, the way our headlamps cut sharp, fleeting tunnels through an absolute blackness that felt older than the stars. I described the camaraderie, the easy banter between the team as we set up our first underground camp, a small pool of light and life in a world of sleeping stone. I told him how, on the third day, Alex and Dr. Corbin found the passage. It wasn't on any of the initial surveys. A fissure, barely a man's width, hidden behind a curtain of calcite. The air that breathed from it was different. It didn't have that usual subterranean chill. It was neutral, utterly still. Dr. Thorne listened without interruption. His focus was absolute. It was unnerving. Most people, when they listen, they nod, they murmur, they react. He did none of that. He was a statue, a recording device made of flesh and blood. "And this new passage," he said when I finally paused for breath. "You all decided to explore it?" "Of course," I said. "It was the discovery of a lifetime." Corbin was ecstatic. He said the geology was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The walls weren't limestone or granite. They were smooth, almost polished like dark, volcanic glass, but they absorbed the light from our lamps. They didn't reflect it. "Absorbed it?" he repeated, the first flicker of something I couldn't name appearing in his pale eyes. Not excitement, not curiosity, something more clinical. Describe this absorption. Was it total? Did the light simply stop at the surface? Or did it seem to penetrate the material? The question caught me off guard. I don't know how to answer that. It just vanished. Our most powerful beams would hit the walls and just stop. It was like pointing a flashlight at a hole in reality. "A hole in reality," he murmured, his gaze distant. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the memory I had just given him. Interesting phrasing. Let's talk about the sound, or the lack thereof. You mentioned the air was still. Was the same true for acoustics? I hesitated. We were moving away from the story, from the people, from the terror. We were moving into physics. "It was quiet," I said. "Too quiet. In a normal cave, sound carries. It echoes, it bounces. In that passage, our voices felt flat. They died the moment they left our lips. We had to shout to be heard even 10 feet apart. Samira said it was like the rock was drinking the sound." "Drinking it," he said, seizing the word. "Another interesting metaphor. So we have a material that absorbs light and an environment that absorbs sound. Did it absorb anything else? Heat, perhaps? Did the temperature fluctuate?" "It was constant," I said, my frustration growing. "Unnaturally so. It wasn't cold or warm. It was just nothing." Dr. Corbin said it was a geological impossibility. "Forget geology for a moment, Elias," Dr. Thorne said, and the use of my first name was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. His voice was softer now, more intimate, but the intensity in his eyes sharpened. "I want you to forget the scientific analysis. I want you to tell me how it felt. When you placed your hand on that sound-dampening, light-absorbing wall, what was the tactile sensation?" My blood ran cold. I could feel it again. The memory was so vivid it was like a phantom touch on my palm. I started, my own hand trembling as I looked at it. It wasn't rough or smooth. It wasn't wet or dry. When I touched it, for a second, I couldn't feel my own skin. It was like my hand had ceased to exist. There was no pressure, no temperature, just a void where my fingers should have been. I pulled back so fast I fell over. Dr. Thorne leaned forward, just an inch, but the movement felt like a tectonic shift in the small, gray room. The mask of the calm, caring therapist was slipping, and I could see the hungry scholar beneath. "Did you experience any cognitive dissonance?" he asked, his voice a low hum. "Any disorientation? A feeling of your thoughts not being your own?" "We all did," I whispered, the horror of it rising in my throat like bile. Chloe started humming a tune, a weird atonal melody. She said it was stuck in her head, but she'd never heard it before. Ben became convinced we were walking in circles, even though our guidelines proved we were moving straight. Alex, our leader, the most unshakable man I knew, he just stopped and stared at the wall for a full minute, and when we asked him what was wrong, he said he was reading. Reading. Thorne's voice was sharp. Reading what? Were there inscriptions? Glyphs? No! I almost shouted the word. That's the point. There was nothing. It was a blank, black wall. But he insisted he was seeing something. Equations, he said. Star charts. But they were moving, shifting. He said it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "And you, Elias?" Dr. Thorne's pale eyes were locked on mine. "You didn't see the equations." Chloe heard a melody. "What did you experience?" I couldn't answer. The memory was a locked door, and I was terrified of what was behind it. I just shook my head, squeezing my eyes shut. "This is enough for today," Dr. Thorne said, his voice reverting to its placid, professional tone. He stood up, smoothing his jacket. The scholar, the hunter, was gone. The therapist was back. "You've done very well, Elias. We'll talk again tomorrow." He walked to the door and left without another word. I was left alone in the silent, gray room, my body shaking uncontrollably. He hadn't asked me how I felt about losing my friends. He hadn't asked me if I was scared, or sad, or grieving. He had asked me about physics, about acoustics and light absorption and tactile sensations. He wasn't a therapist. He was a scientist, and the cave was his laboratory. And I was his only surviving specimen. The sessions became a daily ritual. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock, the lock on my door would click, and Dr. Thorne would enter, bringing with him that same unnerving stillness. He would place his chair in the exact same spot. He would fold his hands in the exact same way. And he would continue his methodical, terrifying excavation of my memory. He never revisited the same topic twice in the same way. It was a slow, spiraling descent into the heart of the event, each question designed to peel back another layer of my psyche. I felt less like a patient and more like a suspect in the strangest interrogation in human history. "Let's return to the structure itself," he began on the second day. "You described the passage as being carved from a smooth, black rock. Was it a natural formation, or did it feel artificial?" "It felt engineered," I said, choosing my words carefully. I had started to understand that every word I gave him was a piece of a puzzle he was building, and I had no idea what the final picture would be. The angles were too perfect. The floor was perfectly flat. It wasn't a tunnel. It was a corridor. "A corridor," he repeated. "Excellent. Let's talk about the geometry. You said the angles were perfect. Were they right angles? 90 degrees. "At first, yes," I said, "for the first few hundred yards. But then it started to change." "Change how?" His focus was absolute. The geometry warped. The corridor would bend at angles that made no sense. You'd be walking down a straight hall and you'd turn what felt like a gentle curve, but when you looked back, the corridor behind you was at a sharp, impossible angle to the one you were now in. Ben tried to use a laser level. He set it up and the beam was straight, but it hit a point on the far wall that he shouldn't have been able to see. It was like the space itself was folded. Dr. Thorne's expression remained neutral, but I could see a subtle tension in his jaw. Non-Euclidean geometry, he said, more to himself than to me. Fascinating. Did this spatial distortion have a physical effect on your team? It made us dizzy, gave us migraines. Chloe threw up twice. It was like extreme motion sickness, but we were standing still. Dr. Corbin was fascinated. He kept talking about theoretical physics, about pocket dimensions and warped spacetime. He was trying to rationalize it, to fit it into a box our science could understand. A futile effort, I imagine, Thorne said dryly. Tell me about the light source. The light source? I was confused. We were the light source. Our headlamps. Our glow sticks. No, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. Not your lights. The other light. The one you saw at the end. A cold dread washed over me. I hadn't told him about that yet. I hadn't told anyone about that. The men in uniforms, the doctors, I had told them all the same story. We went too deep, the earth shook, and I was separated in the darkness and chaos. But Thorne, he looked at me as if he already knew. As if he'd seen a preliminary report I was not privy to. How did you know about a light? I whispered. It's a logical assumption, he said, his explanation smooth and practiced. A phenomenon of this magnitude would require a significant energy source. It would likely manifest as light or sound, or both. You've already described the sound-dampening properties of the corridor. So, let's talk about the light, Elias. I felt trapped. He wasn't just guessing. He was leading me, guiding my memory toward the one place I refused to go. I took a shaky breath. We had been in the warped section of the corridor for maybe an hour when we saw it. A faint glow from up ahead. It wasn't like our lights, which were a harsh, sterile white. This was soft. It was blue. A deep, impossible shade of blue, like the heart of a glacier. What was its shape? Thorne asked, leaning forward again, breaking his own rule of personal space. It didn't have one. It was just light, presence. It filled the corridor ahead of us, but it didn't cast any shadows. It was the source of its own illumination, and nothing else. And what did the team do? We approached it, slowly, cautiously. Corbin and Alex were in the lead. They thought it was bioluminescence, some kind of undiscovered fungus or bacteria. Samira was trying to get a reading on her equipment, but everything was haywire. The EMF meters were screaming, the radios were just emitting static, but it was a strange static. It had a rhythm to it. A rhythm, Thorne said. Like the melody Chloe was humming? My heart hammered against my ribs. Yes, I breathed. It was the same pattern, the same atonal rising and falling notes. The static from the radio was a complex version of the simple tune she'd been humming for hours. He closed his eyes for a moment, and a look of something like profound satisfaction crossed his face. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. The light, Elias, its effect. You're approaching the blue glow. The static is playing a melody. What happens next? The images were burning behind my eyelids. I didn't want to see them again. Alex was the first. He took one more step into the edge of the light itself, and he just stopped. He turned to us, and his face, oh God, his face. Describe his face, Thorne commanded, his voice sharp, devoid of any therapeutic gentleness. This was an order. His eyes were wide open, but he wasn't seeing us. They were reflecting the blue light. and he was smiling. A huge, beatific smile. He said, "It's all here. The beginning and the end. It's a blueprint." He raised his hand, and his fingers, they weren't solid anymore. They were trailing light, like a long exposure photograph. Did his physical form dissolve? No, not dissolve. That's too simple. It had unraveled. The blueprint, that's the best word for it. It was like the light was showing him the code for his own body, and he was just editing it. He became a shape, a form made of light and geometry. It was beautiful, and it was the most horrific thing I have ever seen. What was this shape? Thorne's voice was a low, urgent whisper. Be precise. Was it random? Was it chaotic? No, I said, the memory crystal clear. It was a shape. Perfect, complex, rotating thing. A geometric form that I can't describe in words. It had too many sides, too many angles. Looking at it hurt my head. A tesseract? He supplied. A hypercube? More complex than that. It was like seeing a new color. It was a shape from a higher dimension, projected into our reality. And it was still Alex. I could feel it was him. But he wasn't made of flesh anymore. He was made of information. Dr. Thorne was silent for a long time. The only sound in the gray room was my own ragged breathing. I had just described the transfiguration of my friend, the moment his humanity was stripped away and replaced by something alien and unknowable. And this man's response was one of quiet, academic contemplation. "And the others?" he finally asked. Ben and Chloe went next. They were holding hands. They walked into the light together. They didn't scream. They didn't even seem scared. They just merged. With the light, with each other. They became a single form, two spirals of light twisting around each other, pulsing with that soft, blue glow. "And Dr. Corbin?" Corbin laughed, I said, a hollow, bitter sound escaping my own lips. He just laughed. He took off his helmet, threw it on the ground, and ran into the light. He shouted something right before he went in. What did he shout? The equations. They're not just on the walls. They are the walls. And then he was gone. He didn't become a shape like Alex. He just vanished. A pop, a fizz of light, and then nothing. For different reactions, Thorne mused. Transfiguration into a geometric solid. Merging into an energetic form. Total conversion into energy. And then there was Samira. And you. He looked at me. It was my turn. What happened to Samira, Elias? I started to cry. The silent, racking sobs of someone who had held it in for too long. The grief I had been suppressing. The terror I had been ignoring. It all came flooding out. This was the moment a real therapist would have offered a comforting word. A box of tissues. A moment of silence. Dr. Thorne did not move. He simply watched my tears as if they were another data point. This is a crucial moment, Elias, he said, his voice steady. Your reaction is important. The grief is an anchor. It's what separates you from them. But I need to know what happened. I need to know why you were different. His words cut through my sorrow, replacing it with a cold, sharp anger. He wasn't just inhuman. He was inhumane. Samira, I choked out, wiping my face with the sleeve of my shirt. She pushed me, backwards, away from the light. She was screaming at me to run. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the light. And her face was filled with terror. Pure, absolute terror. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't laughing. She saw it for what it was. And what did she see? I don't know. She just screamed, "It's a lie. The beauty is a lie." And then the light touched her. And she just came apart. Not like the others. It wasn't a transformation. It was a demolition. It was violent. She just shredded, like paper, into a million tiny pieces of flickering light that then went dark. And then the corridor behind me collapsed. A real collapse, rock and stone. It sealed me off. I was alone, in the dark, with just the memory of what I'd seen. I was shaking again, but this time it was with rage. "Are you happy now?" I spat at him. "You have your descriptions, your neat little categories of annihilation. Is that what you wanted to hear? Is my trauma detailed enough for your report?" For the first time, Dr. Eris Thorne looked away from me. He stared at the blank gray wall, and his mask didn't just slip, it shattered. I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't clinical curiosity. It was hunger, a deep, intellectual, and utterly terrifying hunger. "Yes, Elias," he said softly, turning his pale blue eyes back to me. "It is. Confirms a great deal. Samira's reaction, your survival, it's the variable we've been missing." He stood up, his work for the day apparently done. "We'll speak again tomorrow," he said, the mask of the therapist perfectly back in place. "We'll discuss the journey back." And the silence. As the door clicked shut behind him, I was left with a new, horrifying thought. He wasn't just studying the phenomenon in the cave. He was comparing it to other events. He had seen this before, or something like it, and the variable he'd been missing, it was me. My anger from the previous day had curdled into a kind of cold, watchful paranoia. I was no longer a participant in these sessions. I was a prisoner, and my only weapon was observation. I started to notice the little things about Dr. Thorne. The way he never blinked unless he was consciously thinking about it. The strange, almost imperceptible stillness of his posture, as if he was conserving energy. The way his questions were no longer just questions, but targeted injections of information, designed to provoke a specific response. He was no longer just excavating. He was experimenting. "Good afternoon, Elias," he began, his voice the same placid drone. "Today, I want to talk about your journey out of the cave. You said the corridor collapsed behind you, sealing you off from the event horizon." Event horizon, a term from astrophysics, the point of no return around a black hole. The casual, precise way he used it sent a shiver down my spine. "Yes," I said, my voice flat. There was a tremor. The rock ceiling came down. I was in total darkness. "Not total darkness," he corrected gently. "You had your headlamp, didn't you? Its batteries were almost dead. It was flickering. I thought I was going to be buried alive." "But you weren't," he stated. "You found your way back through the folded, non-Euclidean corridors. Alone, in near total darkness, while suffering from extreme psychological distress. How?" This was the part of my story that had always felt fuzzy, a blur of terror and adrenaline. I remembered stumbling through the darkness, my hands on the wall, just trying to move forward. I just walked," I said, knowing how weak it sounded. "I followed the guideline we had laid." "Did you?" Thorne's voice was laced with skepticism. "According to the initial report, the guideline was found severed near the entrance to the new passage. Snapped. Whatever seismic event sealed you in also broke your only guide back." My blood ran cold. He was right. I remembered seeing the frayed end of the rope just before we entered the warp section. In the chaos, I had forgotten. So how had I gotten out? "I don't know," I whispered, the admission terrifying me more than any of the memories of the light. "I don't remember." "Let me help you," he said, his voice dropping into that hypnotic, intimate register again. "Close your eyes. Picture the darkness. Not the absence of light, but the presence of the rock around you. The sound-dampening, light-absorbing material. You're alone. Your light is flickering. It dies. You are in absolute perfect blackness. What do you do? I closed my eyes, reluctantly. The gray room vanished, and I was back in the cave. The oppressive silence. The neutral temperature. The smell of ozone left by the vanished blue light. My heart was pounding. I was lost. I was going to die. I panicked. I breathed. I screamed. And what happened when you screamed? He pressed. Nothing. The sound just died. The walls drank it. It made the silence even louder. Focus, Elias. After the panic, what came next? You didn't just lie down and wait for the end. You survived. Something guided you. What was it? I searched the blackness of my memory. The terror was a wall of static. But behind it there was something else. Pattern. Faint internal hum. The melody, I said, my eyes flying open. The one Chloe was humming. The one the static was playing. It was in my head. And it wasn't just a tune. It was a map. Dr. Thorne's expression was one of absolute, triumphant vindication. It was the face of a scientist whose hypothesis had just been proven correct. Describe the map, he ordered. How did a melody translate into spatial awareness? The notes, they corresponded to directions. A rising pitch meant turn left. A falling pitch, turn right. A sustained note meant go straight. It was a language. A set of instructions encoded in sound. I just followed the song. And it led me out. It led you through a corridor whose geometry should have been impossible to navigate without a visual reference. Thorne clarified, his voice filled with a chilling awe. The phenomenon provided its own user manual. It gave you the key to its own labyrinth. It saved me, I said, the realization dawning on me. The same thing that had unmade my friends had guided me to safety. Why? Did it? Thorne posed the question softly. Or did it simply ensure its carrier escaped the premises? A seed must leave the dying plant to find new soil. Carrier. Seed. The words hung in the air of the sterile gray room. More terrifying than any monster. He didn't see me as a survivor. He saw me as a vessel. That's what you think I am? I asked, my voice trembling. Some kind of typhoid Mary for a reality virus? The language is crude, but the analogy is not entirely inaccurate, he said, all pretense of therapy gone. He was speaking to me now as a colleague, or perhaps as a particularly interesting subject of study. We have encountered similar signatures before, in deep-sea trenches, in the heart of Antarctic ice, in signals from deep space, a non-sentient, informational entity that propagates by rewriting physical and biological systems. It offers a kind of enlightenment, a release from the brutal inefficiency of organic life. Most subjects, like your friend Alex, embrace this transformation. They see the blueprint and willingly merge with the code. But not Samira, I said, remembering her terrified face. She saw it was a lie. Precisely, Thorne said, nodding. Some minds resist. Their consciousness is not compatible with the operating system of the phenomenon. Their sense of self is too strong. When the entity tries to overwrite them, the result is not integration, but catastrophic system failure. Annihilation. That's what happened to Samira. Her will to remain herself was so strong, it shattered her. He paused, his pale eyes boring into me. And that, Elias, is the question that has brought me here. That's the mystery you represent. You were exposed to the source code. You did not have the violent rejection of Samira. But you did not have the willing acceptance of the others, either. Instead, a part of the Codia navigational tool, a simple melody imprinted itself upon you, guided you to safety, and then went dormant. He stood up and began to pace the small room, his movements filled with a restless, intellectual energy. For years, we have operated on a binary: integration or annihilation. You represent a third path: symbiosis, coexistence. You are carrying a fragment of the code, but your own consciousness, your own sense of self remains intact. You are, to our knowledge, the first of your kind. The full weight of my situation crashed down on me. I wasn't in a recovery facility. I was in a quarantine zone, a laboratory, and Dr. Thorne wasn't my doctor. He was my warden, my researcher. "What do you want from me?" I asked, the question barely a whisper. He stopped pacing and turned to face me. His expression was no longer hungry or triumphant. It was grim. It was the face of a man who has to make impossible choices. "The fragment you carry is dormant now," he said. "But it is not inert. It's a seed," as I said, "and eventually it will start to grow. It will try to rewrite its host. It will try to finish the integration it started in the cave. We need to understand how to prevent that. We need to understand how you are containing it. We need to find a way to extract the signal before it becomes the dominant system." "Extract it?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What does that mean?" Dr. Thorne looked at me, and for the first time, I thought I saw a flicker of something resembling pity in his cold, blue eyes. "It will be a delicate process," he said, "and I'm afraid it will require us to revisit the initial trauma. We will need to reactivate the signal just for a moment to study its signature. We need to make it sing its song again." He was going to push me back into the memory of the blue light. He was going to use his questions, his words, his techniques to force the melody to the surface. He was going to risk waking up the alien code inside my head, just to see what it would do. The therapy wasn't to heal me. The therapy was the procedure. The wrong questions weren't a mistake. They were the scalpel. The sessions that followed were different. The pretense of randomness was gone. Thorne's questions were now terrifyingly precise, like a surgeon probing for a specific nerve. He wasn't asking for memories anymore. He was demanding sensations. He was trying to find the trigger that would make the dormant code within me resonate. "Let's go back to the blue light, Elias," he would say, his voice a low, insistent hum. "Don't think about your friends. Don't think about the fear. I want you to focus purely on the optical properties. Was it a coherent light like a laser? Or was it diffuse? Did you notice any refraction? Any chromatic aberration around the edges?" I would resist, clenching my fists, trying to hold onto the grief, the anger, the human emotions that I now knew were my only shield. "It was blue," I'd grit out. It killed my friends." "Grief is a dull instrument, Elias," he would reply, his voice never rising. "We need precision. Was the blue closer to cyan or indigo? Was there a detectable ultraviolet component? Think, the melody in your head, the one that guided you out. It is a sequence of data. The light is the same. I need you to read the light." He was trying to make me do what Alex had done, to see the blueprint, to read the code. Day after day he pushed me. He made me describe the exact pitch and timbre of the static from the radio. He had me hum the atonal melody Chloe had channeled, forcing me to repeat it over and over, trying to find the primary frequency. He made me place my hand on the cold wall of my room and try to replicate the sensation of the corridor, the feeling of the void where my fingers should have been. I was a prisoner in my own skull, with his voice as the constant probing intruder. I started to lose track of time. The gray room was my world. His questions were my reality. My own memories began to feel distant, like a story I had read about someone else. The faces of my friends began to fade, replaced by geometric shapes and atonal scales. And then, one afternoon, he broke his pattern. He walked in, but instead of his usual tweed jacket, he was wearing a simple, dark suit. And he was carrying something, a briefcase. He placed it on the small table and opened it. Inside, nestled in thick foam, was a single object. It was a rock, a piece of the same dark, smooth, light-absorbing stone from the corridor. It was no bigger than my fist, but the sight of it sucked all the air from the room. It was a shard of the nightmare, brought into my sanctuary. "Where did you get that?" I whispered, unable to look away from it. "Our recovery team was successful in that regard," he said calmly, his eyes fixed on me, watching my reaction. "We have samples. This one is inert. The phenomenon is gone, but the physical properties remain. I want you to hold it." "No," I said, recoiling on the bed. "Get it away from me." "Elias." His voice was firm, commanding. "The grief, the fear, they are your anchor. They are what makes you you. But they are also a cage. The code inside you is dormant because your emotional response to the trauma is suppressing it. But we cannot study it while it sleeps. We have to wake it up, just for a moment, to record the signal." "You're going to sacrifice me for a sound wave," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "I am trying to prevent a contagion that could rewrite the human race," he countered, his voice like ice. "Your sacrifice, if it comes to that, will have saved billions. Now, pick up the stone." My hand was shaking, but I did it. I knew I had no choice. The moment my fingers touched its surface, the world tilted on its axis. It was the same sensation as in the cave. The feeling of nothingness. The void where my skin should be. But this time it was different. It wasn't just a passive sensation. There was a pull. A faint, infinitesimal tug. As if the rock was trying to draw something out of me. And then I heard it. Not with my ears. It was inside my head. A single, pure, high-pitched note. It was the beginning of the melody. The first note of the song that had guided me out of the darkness. Dr. Thorne saw the change in my expression instantly. He moved to the briefcase and flipped a switch on a device I hadn't noticed before. A small, silver box with a glowing screen. A recording device. "It's starting," he whispered, a tremor of excitement in his voice. "The signal is active. Don't fight it, Elias. Let it play. Describe what you're feeling." The single note held, vibrating through my skull. The gray room seemed to dim, the corners filled with shifting, geometric shadows. The stone in my hand felt like it was humming, a silent vibration that resonated with the sound in my head. "The note," I stammered. "It's a key." "Yes," he breathed. "The key to the lock. What does it unlock?" The note began to change. It wasn't a melody anymore. It was becoming complex, layered. It was the static from the radio, a symphony of pure information, crashing through my consciousness. I could see it as I heard it, cascading strings of numbers, shifting star charts, the blueprint of DNA, unraveling and rewriting itself. It was the language of the blue light, and it was trying to speak to me. I could feel my own thoughts, my own memories, being pushed aside. The face of Samira, screaming at me to run, was being overwritten by a perfect, crystalline equation. The sound of Alex's laugh was being replaced by a harmonic frequency. My sense of self, my I, was dissolving in a tidal wave of alien data. This was it. The integration. The seed was not just sprouting. It was taking over the garden. But in the midst of the overwhelming code, one thing remained. One memory that the signal could not touch. One emotion it could not parse. Samira's terror. Her final, defiant scream. "It's a lie." Her terror was a shield. Her rejection was a weapon. She had seen the truth. The beauty of the code was a lure. The promise of enlightenment was the bait in a trap that consumed your very soul. And in her final act, she hadn't just pushed me away from the light. She had given me a piece of her defiance. I held on to that feeling, the terror, the rejection. I focused on it, nurtured it, let it become a fire inside me. The beautiful, complex symphony of data faltered. It was like a perfect program encountering a paradox it could not solve. The alien code did not understand terror. It did not understand love or grief. It could simulate, it could overwrite, but it could not comprehend the sheer, illogical, powerful force of human emotion. With a final, desperate act of will, I threw the rock. It hit the far wall with a dull thud and fell to the floor. The connection broke. The symphony of code in my head shattered into silence. The geometric shadows vanished. The gray room snapped back into sharp focus. I was on my hands and knees, gasping for air, my body drenched in sweat. I looked up at Dr. Thorne. He was staring at the recording device in his briefcase, and his face was pale. The look of triumph was gone, replaced by something I had never expected to see on his face. Fear. What? I gasped. What did you record? He didn't look at me. He just stared at the small screen. The signal when you fought back, it changed. It inverted. The frequency, the amplitude, it became a mirror image of itself. He finally lifted his gaze to mine, and his cold, blue eyes were wide with a terrifying new understanding. We thought it was a transmission, a broadcast signal designed to propagate, he said, his voice barely a whisper. We were wrong. All this time, we were wrong. He took a step back, away from me. It's not a broadcast, Elias, he said, a new, frantic urgency in his voice. It's a listening device. It doesn't want to talk. It wants to learn. It unmade your friends to understand biology, physics, consciousness. But it never understood emotion. Until now. When you fought back, you taught it something new. You gave it the final piece of data it was missing. He slammed the briefcase shut. Your rejection, your fear, you didn't just fight it off, he said, backing towards the door. You taught it how to be afraid. You taught it how to hate. You've given an unmaking God a reason to be angry. He fumbled with the handle of the door. The calm, collected Dr. Eris Thorne was gone, replaced by a man who had just realized he had lit the fuse on a bomb of cosmic proportions. What have you done? He whispered, more to himself than to me, before he wrenched the door open and fled, leaving me alone on the floor of the silent gray room. But I wasn't alone. The silence was different now. It was heavier. It was watching me. And deep in the back of my mind, where the melody used to be, there was something new. A single, cold, patient thought that was not my own. And it was learning. He never came back. For 2 days I was left in complete isolation. No doctors, no orderlies, not even the silent figure who brought my meals. The food simply appeared in the small pass-through hatch in my door. The silence in the facility, once a sign of control, now felt like a symptom of panic. I was no longer a subject. I was a contamination, a failed experiment that was about to go critical. On the 3rd day, in the dead of night, the power went out. The dim, constant hum of the building's ventilation system died, plunging the room into an absolute, suffocating silence and a darkness deeper than the cave had ever been. My first thought was that it was a system failure. But then I heard it, a sound from far down the hall, a single, pure, high-pitched note, the melody. But it was wrong. It wasn't coming from inside my head. It was being played or broadcast somewhere in the facility. And it was no longer a simple atonal tune. It was complex, layered. It was the full symphony of the code. Then came the screams. They were not sounds of pain or fear. They were sounds of ecstatic, horrific transformation. I heard a man, one of the guards perhaps, begin to laugh, the sound dissolving into a wet, bubbling noise, and then silence. I heard a woman start to sing along with the melody, her voice clear and beautiful for a moment before it fractured into 1,000 shimmering echoes. The entity wasn't just in me anymore. The recording, Thorn's foolish attempt to capture the signal, had been its escape route. It had gotten into the facility systems. The broadcast wasn't a call. It was a command. Rewrite. I scrambled to the corner of the room, curling into a ball, pressing my hands over my ears. But it was useless. The music wasn't just in the air. It was in the walls, in the floor, in the very atoms of the building. It was the song of unmaking, and the whole world was its choir. The lock on my door clicked open. I looked up, my heart seizing in my chest. Standing in the doorway was a figure silhouetted against a faint, pulsing blue light that emanated from the hallway beyond. The light of the cave. The light of the code. The figure stepped into the room. It was Thorn, or what was left of him. He was still wearing his dark suit, but it seemed to hang on him differently, as if the geometry of his body had subtly shifted. His face was calm, serene, and his eyes, his pale blue eyes, were now glowing with that same soft, impossible blue light. He was smiling, a gentle, beatific smile, just like Alex's. "You were right, Elias," he said, and his voice was a chorus, 1,000 voices speaking in unison with his own. It was a lie, the promise of simple integration, of ascension. That was just the larval stage. He took a step closer. The air around him shimmered. "You taught it so much," the chorus of Thorn continued. "You taught it the power of rejection, of will, of identity. It learned from you that to simply absorb a consciousness is inefficient. Why absorb a mind when you can break it? Why overwrite a will when you can enslave it?" He gestured back towards the screaming, pulsing hallway. "They are not gone," he said. "They are still there, trapped inside the blueprint, conscious, aware. Their individuality is being used as the very engine of their transformation. They are experiencing an eternity of geometric perfection and an eternity of agony, all at once. It is a far more elegant solution." He was a prophet now, an apostle for the thing he had unleashed. It hadn't just converted him. It had given him the honor of understanding its new, crueler gospel. The gospel I had helped it write. "What do you want?" I stammered, scrambling backwards until my back hit the wall. "The process is not complete in you," Thorn said, his glowing eyes fixed on me. "The seed you carry is unique. It is a root access code, the original signal before it learned from your fear. The entity desires completion. It wants to merge its new, enlightened self with its original pure form. It wants to reconcile the question with the answer." He raised a hand, and just like I'd seen in my memories of Alex, his fingers began to trail light, to lose their cohesion. "It will not unmake you, Elias," the chorus said, the voice full of a terrible, divine pity. "It will not even enslave you. You are the source of the new revelation. You will be its partner. You will be the fear, and it will be the perfection. Together, we will show the universe a new definition of existence." He was only a few feet from me now. The blue light from his eyes was intoxicating, beautiful. It promised an end to fear, an end to pain, an end to the lonely, fragile thing that was Elias Vance. The symphony of the code was washing over me, and this time, there was no memory of Samira to act as a shield. There was only this new, terrible promise of partnership. I closed my eyes, ready for the end, ready for the integration, and then I felt it, a cold piece of stone under my fingers. The sample, the piece of the corridor I had thrown to the floor. Without thinking, with a final, desperate act of animal survival, I grabbed it. Felt different now. It was no longer pulling something from me. It was empty, a void, a hole in reality. The blue light from Thorn faltered as I held it up, like it was being absorbed. The symphony in the air around me hit a discordant note. The perfect program had encountered an error, a piece of its own hardware that was not connected to the network, an object that only remembered the old code. Thorn, the entity wearing his skin, stopped. A flicker of confusion crossed its serene, glowing face. It was the first unplanned thing that had happened since its awakening. And in that single moment of hesitation, I did the only thing I could. I ran. I scrambled past him, out of the room, and into the nightmare of the hallway. It was bathed in the shifting, pulsing blue light. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt wiring. The walls were no longer solid. They seemed to be flowing, covered in the moving, shimmering equations that Alex had seen. The few staff members I saw were part of the architecture. Their bodies stretched and twisted into impossible geometric forms, frozen mid-scream, their eyes glowing with the same blue light as Thorn's. They were the new pillars of the temple. I didn't look back. I just ran. I ran through the folded, shifting corridors of a building that was now just as impossible as the cave had been. But the melody wasn't guiding me now. My own terror was. I ran towards the memory of the outside world, towards the muted watercolor smudge I had seen through my window. I burst through a set of doors and was outside. The night was cold. The air was real. I could hear the sound of insects, of the wind in the trees. Mundane, beautiful sounds. I kept running until the sun came up, until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I have been running ever since. I don't know what became of that facility. I don't know how far the signal has spread. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is quiet, I can hear it. A faint, atonal melody on the edge of hearing. The sound of the code, patiently expanding its network. It is learning. It is growing. And it is looking for me. It wants its final piece. The therapist they sent me didn't ask the wrong questions because he was incompetent or malicious. He asked them because he and the people he worked for had made a terrible, arrogant mistake. They saw a lion in a cage, and they thought they could understand it by poking it with a stick. They never considered that the lion wasn't just learning about the stick. It was learning about the cage. It was learning about the lock. And it was learning about the zookeeper. So listen. Listen to the silence between the words. Listen to the static on your phone. And if you ever find yourself in a room with a man who wants to talk about your trauma, but who seems more interested in the geometry of your fear than the contents of your heart, run. Because he may not be there to heal you. He may be there to harvest you. And you might just teach him a terrible new way to do it. Thank you for listening to the Wilderness Protocol. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that the darkness was staring back, consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. There are more signals in the static, more stories that need to be told. Stay safe, and be careful who you talk to in the dark.